Tudor food and etiquette in 14 minutes. The Tudor period began in 1485 with Henry VII and ended in 1603 with Elizabeth I. In Tudor times, what, how and where people ate depended greatly on who they were. The rich nobility enjoyed lavish feasts of meat, seafood and sugary treats, while yeomen and labourers were restricted to a diet of bread, potages and vegetables. Everything from the number of dishes eaten to the ways in which food was served was dictated by status. In Tudor England, you truly were what you ate. The seasons were a major factor in 16th century diets. For small-scale farmers, there was insufficient feed to keep livestock over winter, so the majority were slaughtered, traditionally on Martinmas, 11th of November, and as much of the meat as possible was preserved. But no matter how thrifty the housewife, eking out the meat of a single pig through the whole winter with a few onions and leeks must have been a hard task. The wealthier landowners would keep more meat, slaughtering as needed. Game continued to be hunted throughout the winter by the wealthy, but poaching by the poor could mean hanging. Estimates suggest the Tudor nobility's diet was 80% protein. Salads comprised of a mixture of cooked and raw ingredients and included green vegetables such as leeks, onions, radishes and cabbage, as well as lettuce, chives, boiled carrots, flowers and herbs. They were dressed with oil, vinegar and sometimes sugar. Turnips, consumed during the early 16th century, later fell out of favour, becoming considered fit only for cattle. Fruit was enjoyed, but with no refrigeration, it could only be consumed in season or preserved. Mary I was particularly fond of pears, and Elizabeth of York and Jane Seymour were great lovers of cherries. Henry VIII's palaces had orchards and fruit trees, including the new apricot trees introduced in the 1540s. Most householders served 3 meals a day, although breakfast, breaking your fast, if eaten at all, was not substantial. It consisted of bread, perhaps with butter and sage, washed down with a small ale. The main meal of the day was dinner. In the first half of the century, 10 or 11 a.m. was the dining hour. But by the 1580s and 1590s, it was becoming more usual to eat around 12 p.m. In the houses of the rich, the meal could easily last a couple of hours. On ordinary days in any home of the middle class or above, dinner was divided into 2 courses, each consisting of several different dishes. In Tudor times, maintaining the difference between ranks was so important to the concept of a well-ordered society that efforts were made to enshrine the distinctions between the classes in sumptuary laws. These laws try to control what you ate and wore, according to your position in the God-given hierarchy, which stretched from the king at the top, down through the numerous grades of nobility and clergy, to the gentry, yeomen, and finally the labourers at the bottom of the heap. The poor would not often be able to afford more than pottage, the staple dish, and you could eat as much of that as your budget would allow. The rich ate pottage too, but instead of what was basically cabbage soup with some barley or oats, and some bacon if able, a nobleman's pottage might contain almond, ginger, and saffron, as well as wine. Sumptuary law also dictated the number of dishes per meal. A cardinal could serve 9 dishes, while dukes, marquises, bishops, and earls could serve 7. Lower-ranking lords were permitted to serve only 6, and the gentry class, with an income of £40 to £100 per annum, could serve 3. A dish contained a certain amount of particular item, for example, 1 swan, bastard, or peacock, all reserved for the higher ranks of nobility, but 4 small fowl, or 12 very small birds such as larks. To prevent the higher ranks feeling deprived if they went out to dinner, the host could serve the number of dishes and food appropriate to the highest ranking guest. Additionally, weddings were exempt from the rules. Both courses could offer a pottage plus a selection of meats, custards, tarts, fritters and fruit. The first course tended to offer boiled meats and the second roasted or baked meats. For formal feasts, each course was heralded by the entrance of the subtlety. This was an extraordinary decorative art form, the creation of wonderful representations of castles, cathedrals, hunting scenes or similar, made of marzipan and spun sugar for the most important feasts, and of wax for lesser occasions. At court, following the two main courses, was a third, consisting of spiced wine, known as hippocras, sweetmeats, comfits of all kinds, and wafers. Wafers were forbidden to all but the highest ranks. This course was eaten standing up, and was known as the void, variously taken as meaning that the table had been cleared or voided, or that the course was eaten in a smaller room, thus voiding the hall. The other rule to take into account was a strict observation of fasting on Fridays, Saturdays, and sometimes Wednesdays. Fasting did not mean going without food altogether, just meat, and in Lent, butter, eggs, dairy foods as well. Dining was a communal affair, and Henry VII and Elizabeth of York frequently dined in public in the Great Hall, surrounded by the court. However, Henry VIII preferred to dine in his presence chamber, a half-public, half-private space, and frequently took supper in his private rooms with a few friends and his current wife. Elizabeth I followed this example, and unless she was entertaining foreign dignitaries or was on progress, usually dined alone. At dinner in the Great Hall, whether in one of the royal palaces or the castle of a nobleman, the highest-ranking people sat at the top table, raised on a dais, with other tables arranged at right angles. A strict order of hierarchy was adhered to, with the highest-ranking people sitting at the table to the right hand of the top table, on both sides, moving down to the lowest-ranking present at the furthest end of the table, to the left of the top table. Dining furniture consisted of trestles, which were stored when not in use. The highest-ranking person had a chair, but everyone else sat on benches. The table was covered with a cloth, and it was considered very poor manners to spill any food or drink upon it. The cost of clothes and the difficulty of laundering also added to the need to eat carefully. Food was shared in a mess, a portion of each dish. At the top table there was a mess between two, except the Queen and King, who each had their own, but the lower ranks shared between four, two on either side of the table. Following her proxy marriage to James IV of Scotland, Margaret, daughter of Henry VII, shared a mess with her mother Elizabeth of York to demonstrate her new rank as fellow queen. The highest ranking person helped himself first. As eating was communal, it was important to follow the strict rules of etiquette. These were elaborate yet practical, as they prevented anyone touching food that would be eaten by someone else. Everyone brought his own knife and spoon to the meal, forks being considered a fancy foreign notion. The requirement for a personal spoon is behind the custom of giving one as a christening gift. The place setting was a trencher, made of silver or even gold for the king, then of lesser value such as pewter through to the standard ash for the poorest, a bread trencher, together with a cup, a loaf of bread of appropriate quality, fine white for the lord and coarse brown for lesser status. Among the upper classes a linen napkin was provided, which was draped over the left shoulder. Salt, being costly, was usually only seen on the top table. For soft foods, the diner would spoon some of the servings onto his trencher, being careful not to leave his spoon in the dish. Before taking a helping of anything else, he would wipe his spoon clean with bread. He would eat the food by dipping his bread into it, rather than spooning it up so none of his saliva could enter the communal bowl. For meat, the diner would grasp the piece they wanted with the thumb and two fingers of the left hand, then serve it from the joint, using the knife in the right hand, again ensuring the fingers touched only their portion of food. The food was lifted to the mouth in the thumb and fingers. Dinner in larger households was in relays. Once the master, family and guests had dined, the servants ate what was left. At court, after the king and queen and courtiers have finished, the senior servants would take their places, followed by the junior servants, before the tables were dismantled and stored for the next meal. If any food was left, it was given to the poor. At mealtimes in a normal household or small holding, everyone from the master to field hand would assemble round the table or board. All the attendees would sit in social order, with the master at the top, above the salt, and the labourers at the end, below the salt. The men would take off their hats out of deference to the master, and the ladies would make sure their ears were covered so that they would not hear the whisperings of the devil. The board was a large dining table where dinner was served. However, it was not a table as we know it. A modern table surface and legs are fixed together. A board is different in that the surface was rested on wooden trestles so it could be dismantled to make additional floor space. This was important in Tudor households, where living spaces were often at a premium. The board was essential to Tudor life, and consequently, we've inherited many common phrases from its importance. For example, when everybody gathered around the board at dinner, the master of the house might ask his labourers about conditions on the farm. The resulting conversation would be known as a board meeting. The master himself would sit on a chair while everybody else sat on stools. That made him the chairman of the board. When he paid his labourers at the end of the day, he would place the money visibly on top of the board so that everybody could see there was no financial wrongdoings. This ensured that everything was above board. If it was a Sunday, the rest of the day, then the board might be turned over and on its underside would be games scratched into the surface for people to play. These would be known as board games. Finally, the master might have guests come to stay at the house, and he would traditionally offer them bed and board. Once ready for dinner, forbidden practices included swearing, talking with your mouth full, and belching or farting. Another aspect of being above board was to ensure that the men did not secretly group the women as they sat next to them. Therefore, everybody's hands had to be visible. However, you could not lean your elbows on the board, as the surface was not fixed. If everybody leant on one side of the board, then it might tip and the food would fly everywhere. Even today, it is considered bad manners to put your elbows on the table. Once manners were checked, it was time to get out the napkins and cutlery. Napkins were placed over the shoulder, as it was believed that was where the devil sat. By flicking the napkin over your shoulder, you were hitting the devil in the face. Similarly, when people spill salt, they often throw it over their shoulder. This habit comes from the tradition of throwing salt into the devil's eye. You could also not use cutlery with your left hand, as it was considered that Satan controlled it. Left-handed children were beaten to correct their sin. One of the most common dishes served was pottage. This was a vegetable stew and was commonly used as it was cheap and filling. It mainly consisted of root vegetables, but spices were sometimes used for flavour, and if meat was found in the pottage, it was considered to be potluck. Tudor food and etiquette in 14 minutes. Please subscribe, like or click on the bell to be notified of other upcoming videos. Thank you for watching. See you soon.